Give me a little intro there, Gomer.
There's no turning back now.
Let's put on the show.
You're listening to the Station 71 podcast. My name is Mario, and this week I'm joined by my co-host,
Brian.
That's so weird when it's like just us. And I think it's funny that it's also only ever been just the two of us that have done a two-person episode, but whatever.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, we had, what was
the resort show.
Episode.
Yeah. But this week we've got another kind of long one, so it might actually work out in our favor. We're going to be talking about the history of Pirates of the Caribbean. This one's been kind of requested by a few people, so thank you to whoever requested this. But first up, let's dive into the news, because apparently there was an abundance of that this week, too.
Yes, there was.
So our first one that we're going to talk about is that tickets for Not So Scary Halloween Party popped up this last week. Looks like the party's going to run from August 16th through November 1st. And it is January.
I can't believe how early this came out.
I feel like there's not a lot to say here, but it's just so weird. Like, I had to look up when they traditionally come out, because I know we all thought it felt super early for this one. Apparently they usually come out in like May.
Wow.
So Disney's really trying to bank on people booking their vacations early. I guess it makes sense because you could probably book your vacation now, so they're trying to like cash in on that, but man, is it early.
Man, I know. I feel like almost if I don't decide to go right now, I might not get a ticket. I mean, there has to be a reason that Disney's doing it this early, and I feel like they're expecting huge ticket sales.
Well, I think like the first week always sells out. Isn't that the case? Like, it's traditionally high volume for the first like day or so.
Yeah.
And then they slow down, and then it picks up like closer to Halloween. So they're probably trying to push for that.
Right. I think a lot of that first day and first week is like media presence trying to get in there for reviews and stuff. But yeah, I looked at the prices too. I guess one thing I saw, it doesn't look like prices increased any this year.
No, I noticed that. They're all like the first couple weeks it's all 80 to 80 or yeah, 85, $80 for kids. There's actually like Tuesdays it's $79 to go.
Wow. I mean,
for an adult. That is
a good
really
deal.
good. Yeah.
And it only went up to $115 aside from, the big party on Halloween night, which is $135. But yeah, I mean, the prices aren't that bad.
No, I actually like I've said that this trip that's coming up is going to be our one trip this year because of a couple things that we've got going on. But like seeing this and then seeing the prices and looking at it, I was like, it's not a bad idea. Maybe I'll just upgrade to an AP while I'm down there and then buy a party ticket later.
That's something to think about for sure.
Yeah. So next up, we've got a rumor. Definitely not something confirmed, but I thought this might be fun to talk about. Every now and then we get this rumor, and this time it's popped up again. Atlantic Dance Hall at Disney's Boardwalk is rumored to be closing. Apparently, it's the only thing keeping it alive, according to this post, is that there's a deal between Disney and the Swan and Dolphin that uses Atlantic Dance Hall for conventions, and that's usually the only time that it sees a splurge in its presence.
Really? I've never actually been in there.
Neither have I, and I've heard that, like, I don't know. I've heard that it's pretty quiet nowadays, so I wouldn't be surprised if this is true.
Yeah, it's strange, but I can't think of anywhere on Disney property that offers something like this, like an actual dance club to go to.
Yeah, and that's kind of what this article was saying too, is that it's like a one-of-a-kind offering now that Pleasure Island is closed, but Disney doesn't advertise for it, so there's really no draw here.
Yeah, when me and my wife actually went to the yacht club to eat this past weekend, and I remember looking across to the boardwalk and seeing the dance hall, and I was just kind of like, huh, you know, like we haven't been to the boardwalk in quite a while, and we didn't go in there when we went, and it's kind of just like it's a massive building too, like it takes up a huge amount of space on the boardwalk, and
Right.
yeah, it's just kind of not a very popular thing to do at Disney.
Yeah, I feel like the boardwalk in its entirety is very like Disney should advertise more stuff on there, but I guess it's nice to have like a quiet spot. I don't
Yeah.
know. Don't know. And then last on our, I guess, more detailed, because I have a couple quick fire ones in here that we can go through. 2019 Flower and Garden details also came out this week. Apparently, a new Bo Peep and her sheep topiary are coming to the family play zone area. We're getting that this year. The butterfly featured gardens will focus on butterfly bamboo and Shakespeare's metaphoric plants. I cannot talk tonight, apparently. And then, obviously, we're getting 70 Disney-themed topiaries from Snow White to Daisy Duck, which that's standard.
Yeah.
We're also getting some new outdoor kitchens that are going to feature their own herb gardens and veggie gardens, which that's pretty cool. And the Concert Rock series expands to every night of the week of the festival.
Wow, that's
So,
pretty big.
yeah, every night there's going to be offerings for that.
Very curious to see, when the performances are coming out.
There's a few of them out already, actually.
Really?
I
No, I
looked
haven't seen
today. Yeah, and I let me pull it up. Yeah, I was looking today because I just out of curiosity, I was like, "Oh yeah, we're going to be there for Flower and Garden." Let me look up, or not Flower and Garden. Yeah, Flower and Garden. I was like, let me look it up and see who's actually going to be there for the Garden Rocks thing. And if you go to Flower and Garden's webpage, there's a couple of them there. There's not a lot. Like the former lead vocalist of Journey is going to be there from March 6th to the 8th. And then the next one, it's like the 9th through the 10th. So they don't have like the whole week lined up, even though a lot of places are saying that they are doing them every night. And I think that, yeah, the actual website says shows are 7 nights a week during the festivals at 5:30 p.m., 6:45, and 8.
Yeah, I'm looking through this lineup right now. This is it's a pretty rough year.
Yeah, it really is. And it's funny because, like, I was looking at these, I was like, I don't think I'd really want to see anyone that's here.
No, I mean,
I
I usually see one or two that I'm like, oh, I would really like to make it a point to go see them, and then I see a couple where I'm like, well, if I'm passing by while we're there, I'll probably stop and watch that. And all of these are kind of just like, yeah, I don't even know if I would do that.
What's even more funny is, like, I was scrolling through this list, and I was like, who's there the first day or the day that we're there? And the only date that's listed, I mean, Air Supply's there for the last 2 days we're there, and Simple Plan is there the first day we're there. And I was like, huh, that's a weird difference there.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
But hey, there's, excited about the rest of the festival for sure. I didn't realize it ran for 90 days.
Yeah.
When are they gonna expand Festival of the Arts?
That's the other thing I was thinking about today, too. Like, Festival of the Arts really doesn't run that long. It ends in February, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah, and it starts this weekend. Like, it's very short. I live here and I still feel like I've almost missed it every year because of its short run.
I feel like once it gets more popular, they'll maybe expand it. But it's already gaining like a lot of traction in the last couple years.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to see how long this actually is. Oh wow, January 18th through February 25th.
Yeah,
That's like nothing. I feel like that's probably also really expensive for them to run too, with all the like. Well, no, it can't be any more expensive than the other festivals.
Well, I mean, I think that they're getting a lot of sales at Food and Wine, especially, so that they're making a profit off of that. I guess at Festival of the Arts, they're probably not selling as much merchandise and specialty stuff, so it probably doesn't pay for itself as well.
That's true. So let's do some quick fire on these last three because these are just kind of pretty simple ones. Well, we can maybe talk about this one a little bit. First one I have on here is that an opening date has been announced for Lightning McQueen's Racing Academy at Disney's Hollywood Studios. The show is going to be opening March 31st, 2019. We briefly talked about this before. It's essentially a stage show movie thing from what we've heard, and that's pretty much it. But it's going to be coming within the next 3 months, so something extra for Hollywood Studios.
It needs it.
Yeah, for sure. Another news topic is a baby giraffe was born in Animal Kingdom over the last couple days. Very exciting. It's always exciting when they have new animals pop up.
Yes. Especially when it's one as cute as this.
Yeah. Apparently the giraffe gave birth, like, while people were on the attraction.
Oh, I didn't realize it was, like, out in the open. I would have thought that they would have taken it, to, like, one of the, either where Rafiki's Planet Watch is, or I know they have, the like, animal facilities outside of Kilimanjaro safaris. But...
Yep. The actual Disney article says, what an exciting week. By now, you've probably heard the news about Disney's Animal Kingdom and the arrival of the new giraffe, who was born on the Kilimanjaro Safari Savannah on Monday. Guests who were on the attraction got to experience the wonders of nature firsthand and see some of the special moments leading up to the calf's delivery. So I saw pictures floating around online of, like, the feet hanging out. So, like, I guess maybe they moved it after that because I didn't see anything else. But, like, no, the giraffe was still on the safari for moments up until birth.
I mean, I guess that's the most natural way that could occur, so it's cool.
Yeah. And then lastly here, we have Sebastian's Bistro, the newest dining at Caribbean Beach, is going to be stopping their lunch offerings in the next coming weeks.
It just opened.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't the first time. We saw this with Woody's Lunchbox. They stopped their sandwich that they were having, their Monte Cristo sandwich that they had within, like, the first weeks of opening. So
I just don't get that, though. It's unless they weren't selling anything at lunch, that's all I can think of. And they decided it was cheaper to shut it down.
Yeah, that's got to be it. It says January 27th, Sebastian's Bistro will only serve dinner from 5 to 10. So 5 hours of the day they'll be open.
Wow.
And this article also recommends that if you want lunch, you can get lunch at the Spyglass Grill and Centertown Market at 11:30, and then the Banana Cabana Pool Bar beginning at noon. So there's that.
Okay.
So that said, now that we've quickly run through the news, we can talk about the fun stuff.
Woohoo.
I think you had the most about the early stuff, and then I just threw a bunch of things in at the end here. So I guess let's start by talking about the opening of the attraction and maybe some, like, stuff that we watched and read or whatever to get prepped for this, if you had anything fun.
Yeah, I mean, I watched a couple, YouTube videos explaining it. Obviously, I like telling the stories, but I would definitely suggest, listeners go check out some of the videos, and especially take a look if you get a chance at some of the websites and videos that show the concept art behind this, because that was one of the things that really grabbed my attention when I was doing the research for this.
There's also the one that I wanted to plug really quick in here was there's a hour and a half long documentary on the making of Disneyland's Pirates of the Caribbean. It's really cool because it goes through a lot of the attraction, like, and the concept of making it. So they show a lot of the concept art and stuff that you really liked, and they also have the like the Wonderful World of Disney stuff cut in there too.
Oh,
so
awesome.
There's a lot of that in there, and that was really cool. That's actually where pretty much all of my notes came from.
Nice.
So yeah.
All right. Well, I guess before we really dig into this, if any of our listeners are getting very, very strong deja vu from when we did the Haunted Mansion episode. That's probably because these two attractions parallel each other very strongly with, the development and the steps it went through. I mean, obviously we're looking at the same time period and we're looking at two attractions that were initially built in the same section of a park, but still, I think it's very interesting how closely related these two attractions were.
Yeah, that's the funny thing about like both of these is I didn't realize that until you said it, and I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember them saying that this thing was very similar to that other thing we talked about, and then this thing was, and like I'm looking at my notes now, I'm like, okay, yeah, no, this is very similar.
Extremely. I think the actual outline of ours is like has many of the same like bullet points as far as the outline. The details are a little bit different, but yeah.
Well, just barely.
But
there's also one thing that I know that we have to plug here. I know that neither of us read it, but based on the Haunted Mansion book, we should probably plug the Jason Sorrell book.
Oh, definitely. I wanted to get the book so bad, and I don't know why Amazon doesn't have it. And
they don't?
Well, Amazon doesn't sell it themselves. They have third parties, and all the third party ones were like used books and stuff. So I was trying to find somewhere that actually sold like a new copy of the book for me to get. And at least as far as I know, like the attraction does not have this book in the gift shop like they do at Haunted Mansion, which made it a very easy grab for me to get. So,
oh, that's weird.
Yeah, especially considering how big the Pirates gift shop is.
Yeah, I didn't know that at all.
Yeah. I mean, somebody might correct me, but I was in there this past weekend and I did not see it, and I looked for it. So, yeah. But anyways, I guess we can start our dive into the history.
Yeah, sounds good. You had a lot of the early stuff.
Yeah.
So I'll leave that to you.
So I guess development for Pirates picks up in the early 50s, and this is before the opening of Disneyland, and Walt and the Imagineers at WED are just beginning initial development for attraction ideas. And one of the things that gets thrown out at this time was a pirate wax museum. The initial idea really didn't gain much traction before the park opening, and it was quickly set aside, and resources were spent into developing other attractions. During my research, I kind of went down a little bit of a rabbit hole, which is why I threw this in here. But Disney did not let Disneyland open without any pirates, though. The Imagineers developed a restaurant called Captain Hook's Pirate Ship, and I had never seen this before. Now, obviously, I've only ever been to Disney World, so I haven't seen a lot of stuff in Disneyland, and this thing closed before I would have even had a chance to go. But I loved looking at the pictures of this. Have you ever seen this restaurant?
I'm about to look it up right now.
So it is.
Whoa!
It is so well themed. I mean, the Imagineers took a small body of water that was in Disneyland, and they built a dock leading out to a pirate ship in the middle. I mean, and it is like a full-on pirate ship, and I love looking at the concept art for this. It was so cool. I think it's pretty obvious that the size of it and where it was and everything with the parks today, it probably wasn't large enough and offer enough seating to really, make an impact in the park today and be able to serve enough people. But I think this is just so cool how much design went into this thing.
So I kind of want to jump ahead a little bit here because I'm looking at this now and I realized something, and I thought this was maybe just like, oh, I've never been to Disneyland, so I wouldn't know where this is. But there is actually a video in the documentary I watched where they did like a media event, and there's people dressed as pirates like all along like the walkway and everything, and they're like hassling the media and all that other stuff, and they're on a pirate ship, and it's this pirate ship.
Oh, okay, nice.
And I'm sitting here and I'm looking at it, I'm like, it all makes sense now.
That's really cool. But this restaurant was actually sponsored by Chicken of the Sea, And man, I wasn't able to find a menu of what this place served, but if it was sponsored by Chicken of the Sea, I imagine that there was canned tuna there. And I don't know if I could imagine a worse meal walking around a hot theme park than a tuna sandwich.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this restaurant was a staple at Disneyland. It was open with the park in 1955, and it stayed open until 1982. So it had a pretty good run. So Disneyland itself opens in 1955, getting us back on track to our actual attraction that we're talking about. So park opens in 55, and it is initially not as big of a success as Disney and the Imagineers had thought it would be. It did quickly pick up steam after that, though, and became much more popular and saw very, very high growth rate for attendance. And going into the first 2 years of the park, the Imagineers and Walt really realized that in order to keep up with the demand and the growing popularity of the park, there were going to need to be expansions. And this is when we see our first major expansion to the park. This time there was a small area near Frontierland in the park that was known as Magnolia Park. And it was essentially just a seating area for guests. It had shade trees to sit under. And there was also a small plantation-style restaurant. The Imagineers took this and said, well, let's do something a little bit more specific than just this overall southern themed area, and let's actually, pick an actual place to do it after. So they picked New Orleans, and this is, of course, the basis for the development of New Orleans Square. So in 58, Walt officially announces plans for the development of this section of the park. And lists some of the things that would be coming to it. So we got a wax museum that would eventually turn into the initial concepts of Pirates, the haunted house, which would eventually become the Haunted Mansion, and then a thieves market.
New Orleans Square was actually supposed to be a 3-layered concept. I don't know if you're about to get into that.
Yeah, I will get a little bit into that, but
yeah, so it was the bottom was supposed to be where this wax museum was supposed to be, the underground in New Orleans Square. And then there was a mid-level, and I can't quite remember what was supposed to be in there. And then the top was supposed to be offices and Walt's extra apartment. Mm-hmm. And that's just so cool that they thought that far. They were like, oh yeah, we're just we'll put an attraction in the underground and this and that. There really was no limit to Imagineering's dreaming with this.
Oh yeah, it's really cool. And as much as I love what this turned into, and how big of an impact it had from it developing into more of a ride than what was initially supposed to be, I still think that would be pretty cool to see that kind of tiered land system in the park.
I wonder how they would have been able to pull that off.
I don't know. It's very interesting.
I guess maybe kind of how Diagon Alley has an inside and an outside section for some of it. Maybe that would be how they would do it. Just go through an entrance and then you go through an underground, but not really know you're going underground. I don't know. Anyway, back on track.
So, with the overall game plan for the development of New Orleans Square, the Imagineers started to go to work on some of the more specific developments of this. They decided that because New Orleans actually had a lot of pirates throughout its history, which kind of played a significant impact in it, they brought back the idea of the Pirates Wax Museum that had been pitched before the park had opened. So the initial design for this was going to be an area that would transport guests to an 18th century Caribbean island. I believe, and getting into when you were talking about the tiered system, I think that this is when a lot of that kind of started to change too, because this would have been very, I think, difficult to do, because the idea was, for the pirate museum, whatever it was going to be on that underground tier. And I don't understand like how they would make that. How do you have a tropical island that is inside and underground? That doesn't seem like it would work very well.
No.
But at this point, Mark Davis was brought onto the team, very, very famous Imagineer for those that don't know. And he was tasked with coming up with some concept art for the attraction. So he ends up doing some sketches, and they see the things that he came up with and decided to kind of move away from this idea of it being a tropical island and having it fit in more with the New Orleans theming and just make it like a small seaport town near New Orleans.
One of my favorite things about Pirates is the same thing that we talked about with Haunted Mansion, where the original vision for the attraction is not where it ended up being.
Not at all. Not at all.
I don't know if this comes into play quite yet either, but there's a part in the Haunted Mansion development where they initially wanted it to be more themed to like famous pirates of history.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of ties in with the like initial concept. And I later have this on my notes. I guess we can talk about it now. But through the research and like developing of the actual attraction itself, they found that pirates weren't as glamorous as everybody thought they were. And most of them were just like hired thieves and like murderers. And instead of dying through like these adventurous means, most of them died from diseases. So Disney moved away from that pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's a bit hard to fit that into a family attraction.
Yeah.
But so as this concept moved into this seaport town, some of the things that were proposed were pretty cool. And this is one of the things that I definitely suggest going and looking at the concept art for this, because it's pretty cool the stuff that they were planning on fitting into this relatively small underground space. I mean, there was a dock with a fairly large pirate ship, multiple buildings and everything, and this whole town square that would be built underground and have all these wax figures. And so it's pretty cool. I always love going back and looking at that stuff.
Yeah, concept art is like one of the best things about Disney history.
Oh, for sure. So the Imagineers continued working on this, and by 1961 they had plans finalized for this tiered setup for New Orleans Square, and actually began construction on the lower portion of it, which was to become the Pirate Museum. So this construction continues for a few years until, as a lot of people know, Walt was approached to create a series of attractions for the 1964 to 65 World's Fair in New York. When this happened, Walt took nearly everybody that was working for WED and tasked them solely on working for projects for the World's Fair. Almost no development into the park was going on at this time. And if you remember from our discussion of the history of Pirates, or I'm sorry, not Pirates, the Haunted Mansion, Haunted Mansion development was pretty much in full swing at this time along with Pirates, and both of those got just absolutely shut down so that everyone could focus on the World's Fair.
It's crazy.
It really is. So during this time, Walt and the Imagineers developed a total of 4 attractions: Ford's Magic Skyway, Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, Progress Land, which became renamed to Carousel of Progress, and It's a Small World. So obviously pulling his whole team off of tasks that were, directly related to Disneyland, and basically supporting these other companies with their advertisement and their boost for the World Fair. Walt was taking a pretty big gamble at this time, but it really paid off, because when you look back at it, 3 of these attractions made it back into the park like as they were at the World's Fair, and you got 2 ride systems developed, which were the Omnimover system that was used for Ford's Magic Skyway, and then the boat ride system that was developed for It's a Small World. and both of those are seen in many places throughout the rest of the parks. So it it was risky, but when you see the payoffs from what Disney and the Imagineers got out of it, like, it was hugely rewarding.
Definitely a big risk reward situation.
And the thing that is funny to me, I was thinking that probably the three most iconic attractions at Disney, I would say, are It's a Small World, Haunted Mansion, and Pirates. And if Disney doesn't agree to do this for the World's Fair, It's a Small World just in its entirety does not get made. With the issues that Haunted Mansion was having at the time during development, I feel like it would have just completely gotten scrapped because of the issues that they were having with making it work on a scale that they wanted to. And Pirates would have most likely gotten built as a wax museum and almost certainly would not exist in the park today or have been, developed into the other parks over the years either. It's just crazy how much this decision really impacted Disney park history.
And not even just that, if you think about it this way too, I mean, It's a Small World is such a classic attraction. We've talked about that in what you just said. And think about how impactful for audio animatronic technology that Lincoln figure is.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, there's so much history just tied to this one major event that if Disney hadn't taken a gamble on, probably a lot of this stuff wouldn't be as big as, it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Walt was definitely a risk taker over the years, but boy, if it didn't pay off.
That's for sure.
So after the conclusion of the World's Fair, WED and Disney shift their focus back towards the park and pick back up on the concept for the Wax Museum. However, after what they learned at the park or at the World's Fair, they saw that really for the future of Disneyland, any ride or attraction that they were developing was going to have to be what they called people eaters. It was going to have to move a huge number of people through at a time, just because the popularity of the park was growing so quickly that they knew that something like a walkthrough attraction that could maybe only see a couple hundred people an hour go through it really wasn't going to do much to draw people into the parks and really, keep their attention focused there. So they took what they learned from the World's Fair and decided to use Pirates, or this pirate attraction that they were developing, as a showcase for the stuff that they introduced at the World's Fair, and mainly the boat ride system that they had developed for It's a Small World, and also the audio animatronics that were used there, and as Mario mentioned in great moments with Mr. Lincoln. So as the concept for this ride kind of takes a shift, we go back to the initial art that Mark Davis had come up with, and it really started influencing not only, the overall theme of the ride, but also some of the specific parts of it. So a lot of his sketches involved things that were going on in this supposed seaport town, and after that was scrapped for the Wax Museum, that the whole concept of a town really makes up the majority of the Pirates of the Caribbean ride as we know it. And then of course you get stuff like very specifically like the scene that has the prisoners trying to lure the dog with the keys over with them with a bone was a sketch that it's so cool to look at the sketch because it looks like somebody drew a picture from the ride because it is almost exactly as it looks in the attraction.
And that's a very rare thing. Like, even through just our research on these attractions, it's almost like very, very slim that you see an actual concept art come to life in the attraction almost exactly how it was drawn, and this is it.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm guessing you got a chance to look at some of this stuff in that documentary that you watched.
Yeah, and I looked up some concept art because you can't not look at the concept art.
But, one thing, like looking at Mark Davis's sketches, it's crazy to me, like how modern his drawing style was for the time. Like I don't know. It was just, I feel like a lot of the other concept art that I looked at for some of the other attractions and everything, it looks like something out of, the 50s and 60s when the stuff was being developed. But his sketch that he had for this scene with the dog and the prisoners, it looked like it was something to be developed in a kid's cartoon nowadays. Like it's very interesting to see his art style.
Yeah, it definitely is, and I agree with that 100%.
So at this point, they've got an overall idea of some of the scenes and settings for the ride, and they start to storyboard the actual plot line for this. This caused the scale and scope of this attraction to just grow exponentially, and the Imagineers realized that this small plot of land, it was initially going to be stacked on 3 tiers so that they could fit the things that they wanted in, it was not going to work. I mean, you go from a small walk-through wax museum to now this incredibly large boat ride, and the initial plot of land just was not going to work. So very similar to what we saw with Haunted Mansion, the Imagineers decided to build a separate show building that was actually located outside the gates of the park and have a facade that the guests walked into that was inside the park. So in 1965, Walt brings Exitentio onto the team at WED. He was an animator and storyboard artist for Walt Disney Animation. And like we've seen Walt do a lot, he took people that he knew were good at storytelling and maybe didn't have, design and, on like an engineering type scale, that kind of talent. But he knew that they had talent, and he was so focused on storytelling in his parks that he brought these people over to do these types of jobs, and they just worked out fantastically. So Exitentio does a lot of development work for the storyboard for the ride, and he was also tasked with writing a song. Now, I think this is so cool because this was actually the first song that Exitentio had ever written. Walt assigned him and George Burns to create a theme song for the attraction. So George Burns develops the music and Exitentio writes the lyrics. And this became Yo-Ho, A Pirate's Life for Me. And that's just crazy to me that like this is your first go at something like this. And I mean, it's possibly the most iconic Disney park song ever. I mean, who doesn't know this?
Yeah, I mean, this and Small World, I would say, are probably the 2 most iconic songs to come out of the parks.
Oh,
and yeah, that's crazy.
It's just absolutely knocked it out of the park on the first go around. Work continues on this. The project is starting to wrap up, and at this point, during all the press conferences and promotional items that are going out, this attraction is being referred to as Blue Bayou Lagoon, and that was a name that really stuck during a lot of the development. And I did see a snippet of the Wonderful World of Disney when Walt was on there promoting this, and he was still referring to it at this time as the Blue Bayou Lagoon.
Yep, that was in the documentary too.
Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until very, very close to the opening of this attraction that it was actually changed to Pirates of the Caribbean.
Which is crazy that they waited that long to change the name, but not surprising in the slightest bit. Funny enough that your next point is going to hit on this more, but while they were test running the actual attraction itself around this time, as they had started to like set the building up, there were a few figures that weren't entirely like ready to run, but they had set them in place so that they could stage the scene and everything. The only animatronic that actually worked at this point was the auctioneer, who is said to be really advanced for his time, and I guess you could kind of see that as he was one of the most like fluid moving figures on that attraction. Mm-hmm. but Imagineering rigged up a chair to a dolly system to pull Walt through the scene so that he could actually see the auction scene for himself as, like, they staged it and they set it up and they played the audio over it. But when they ran through the actual audio of the attraction, they all kind of got into a panic because they were like, oh no, there's so much going on here. Guests aren't going to know what to focus on. And as they were pulling Walt through this attraction, they were kind of like telling him, we're going to change this and that. And they got to that scene and they were like, yeah, we're definitely going to have to change this because there's just too much going on. We just don't know what to focus on. And Walt was like, no, don't change it. I love this. It makes me think about like a cocktail party. And every time you go through it, you're going to hear something new. And I think that's just so cool because it is really something that when you go through that scene, you kind of picked up different things and hear new little tidbits of dialogue.
And that's the big difference between Haunted Mansion and Pirates. Of all the similarities they share is that, the ride system with Haunted Mansion was made to direct your attention at one thing and to really, see this illusion or this gag one at a time. Whereas Pirates, you're kind of just like thrust into the world and you get to look around and really pick up on different things every time.
I think that's one of the coolest things about Pirates too. Like, you just started to hit that phrase that I've been kind of trying to figure out is you're thrust into this world. And from the second you round that corner outside of the cavern and go into the room where that big pirate ship is, like, that everything is just so larger than life inside this attraction.
Yes, definitely. So at this point, unfortunately, Walt's health had began to deteriorate, and on December 15th, 1966, he passes away, and this was only 3 months before the opening of Pirates of the Caribbean at Disneyland. This was the last attraction that Walt personally worked on.
Which I did not realize till we started doing this, and I feel like a bad Disney fan for not knowing that.
But yes, 3 months after his death, on March 18th, 1967, Pirates and the Blue Bayou restaurant that were in the show building opened its doors, and it was just absolutely an immediate success. This, going back to what we talked about after the World's Fair, people really had not seen audio animatronics before, and certainly not on this scale, along with a dark ride that you were also on a boat. Like, this was a just completely revolutionary ride design. It combined so many elements, and I guess I'll go ahead and throw this in here because I didn't even realize this, but for this being the first attraction that really focused on the audio animatronics and really had a large number, there are 128 total audio animatronic figures in Disneyland's version of Pirates of the Caribbean when it opened. And I mean, that's just, it's crazy to think how much work had to go into just those characters.
Oh yeah, that's insane.
I mean, that's just 0 to 100 like crazy. It's like, well, we should showcase some of our animatronics. It's like, let's throw over 100 of them into this one attraction that nobody's seen before.
Yeah, that's wow. And also to this, I don't know if like your thing had this, but apparently like the entire ride wasn't fully ready to be opened the day that it opened.
Oh, really?
Like,
I did not see that.
So apparently they were still like installing some stuff like figures and props and things in the actual building the like couple days after it opened.
Wow.
But apparently Disney Imagineering has some like wonderful people who think like a million steps ahead, because there's some stuff later down the line that we're going to get to too. But a couple days into the actual attraction being open, a fire broke out in one of the scenes that, funny enough, has fire in it, and damaged a few of the audio animatronic figures' clothing. When the the Imagineers were kind of in a panic trying to figure out what they were going to do, the lead costume designer, Alice Davis, spoke up and was like, well, you guys told me before that I'm not allowed to make doubles of all the costumes because it would take too long, or we needed to get everything like in line. And she went, But instead, I went behind your back and I just cut double of the costumes and made doubles of the costumes just in case something happened.
Oh
So
man, I bet
just a
she
fun little
felt
tidbit.
good that day.
Yeah, there's an interview with her in the documentary, and it's funny because how she tells the story is just so great. She's like talking about how when she designed things, she wanted to make different costumes so that they could like they weren't quite sure because the whole process of Pirates, even though it's such a big and like beloved attraction, it's very rushed. Like it's very like quick from let's build this to it opening kind of thing. And she told them like I just want to get everything right and I want to make doubles of the costumes just in case. And they're like, no, we don't have time. We can't do this. So instead, she just laid the patterns on top of like 2 sets of fabric and cut 2 sets of fabric at once.
Oh wow, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Another fun fire-related fact to Pirates of the Caribbean. I couldn't confirm this, so take this with a grain of salt, but it was one thing that came up during my research, was that apparently the scenes that have fire in them were deemed so realistic when the fire marshals went through this building for an inspection that they had to rig the fire alarm system so that if it went off, it would automatically shut off the fake fire so that guests wouldn't be confused and would, see the real fire and not the fake one.
And I can confirm that because that was in the documentary
nice.
too.
But yeah, so Pirates of the Caribbean opens, immediate success, and it's a marquee attraction at Disneyland for 50 years now. And of course, anybody that's been to any of the Disney parks around the globe has probably been on this ride because there is one in every Disney park around the world.
Yeah.
The first one that opened was in Magic Kingdom and obviously opened in Adventureland because there was no New Orleans Square in Disney World. And yeah, very, very shortly after the park opened, 2 years.
But do you know why it took them 2 years to open this?
I do not know.
Okay, so funny enough, when they were designing Disney World, they were looking at the like attractions they could possibly put in there, and Pirates was thought of, but then quickly tabled because there's a bunch of pirate attractions in Florida at this time already. So Disney's like, we don't want to do anything like this. We don't want anything to compare us to anyone else outside. And instead of that, Mark Davis is tasked with designing an attraction called Western River Expedition. And this ride gets fully fleshed out as a concept. They have all the show scenes set up and ready to go. And everything's getting like to the point where they're going to start designing stuff. And then people start to find out that Pirates isn't going to be in Walt Disney World. And it gets shut down and scrapped for Pirates.
It's funny that it was a Mark Davis attraction too when he hit it out of the park so well with Pirates.
And I'm telling you, go look for concept art for Western River Expedition because there's a lot of similarities between this and Pirates. So it's kind of like you could see where it makes sense for them to table it. But man, if they just like could not have laid that on any harder. Like, oh yeah, your attraction in Disneyland was such a hit. We're going to have you design a new one for Disney World. Never mind. Bring your old attraction to Disney World.
Oh, that's funny. So 10 years after the opening of Pirates at Disney World, a new version is open at Tokyo Disneyland. This was opening day at Tokyo, so I think this time around the Imagineers had kind of learned their lesson that, yeah, hey, people like pirates pretty much everywhere, so we're going to make sure this one's actually in the park when it opens.
And what they did with this one was they essentially like took New Orleans Square, copied it, and put it in Tokyo Disneyland. But obviously, like, this was, one of their big ventures into doing out-of-country Disney parks. And apparently the only thing that really went wrong in doing this were the translation errors. The initial version of the opening dialogue of Pirates of the Caribbean, where the line is "Dead men tell no tales," was translated initially to "There are no lips on a dead man." And the Imagineers were like, that makes no sense. How can we translate that over? And no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't find the Japanese dialogue to translate Dead Men Tell No Tales. So eventually the translation they landed on was, if you're not careful, you won't pass this way again.
Oh, that's hilarious. So this version of Pirates stuck much more closely to the original Disneyland one. I guess big Disney fans will know that Disneyland's version of Pirates is much longer than Disney World's, and there were opening scenes at Disney World that were just completely removed, and some other stuff throughout the ride that was gone. But this one at Tokyo kind of stuck to Disneyland's original idea. Let's see. So Disneyland Paris opens 9 years later in 1992, and again, there's pirates. Nothing really different about this one. Still, it stays pretty true to the original one too, and it's there on opening days. Like I said, Disney got the memo from people on the East Coast that you should not open a Disney park without a pirates ever again.
So another thing that I'm kind of noticing here, this is kind of where our Haunted Mansion and Pirates splits a little bit, because the only Haunted Mansions that are actually like really similar are Disney World and Disneyland's, correct? Like everything else is so vastly different.
Right, yeah.
That it's crazy to think about. Like Pirates made that much of a hit that it's like, okay, there's some differences between like ours and Disneyland, but they're still close enough. And then, Tokyo, Paris, they're all close, but then the next one you're going to talk about is vastly different.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, on that note, in 2016, with the opening of Shanghai Disneyland, their version of Pirates of the Caribbean is open, and this is by far the one that deviates mostly from the original ride. It took a lot more from the movies. I don't want to say, I've seen the ride through videos. I obviously haven't been on this attraction in person, but it is not a retelling of the movie franchise, but it is far more inspired from the movie franchise than the other ones. And it takes a lot more of the characters and a lot more of, I don't want to say the storyline, but a lot of the setting and the scenes mirror that of the movies. And the technology at this time makes this ride completely different. There's a ton of screens and projections used in this one. Some of the effects I think are done very well. I'm obviously not a big fan of screens on attractions, but some of the projection stuff that they do on this is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think this is like one of the most advanced attractions to come out of Shanghai Disneyland. I mean, we knew that they got some of the most advanced stuff, but this one's crazy.
Yeah. I remember when this first came out and like the first ride through video was posted, and I watched it. And have you seen it?
I have, yeah.
Oh, and that first opening thing when like the Jack Sparrow animatronic like transforms from a skeleton into Jack Sparrow, I must have rewound that thing like 10 times over that 2-second clip and been like, what are they doing? I was like, I just saw black magic happen. And then somebody was like in the comments was like, oh yeah, it's just like they're projecting that onto him and then they just take it off. I'm like, that is so simple, but it was executed like to perfection.
And see, like that's the kind of projections that I don't mind.
Exactly.
Disney do them. I don't know. But I guess that brings us to our final couple segments here with the changes over the years. The funny thing about this one is that there weren't really a lot, but there were some pretty big ones. One of the first ones that we saw was in 1963 when Disney installed an animatronic bird called the Barker bird outside of this attraction and the Tiki Room. And this attraction would this animatronic would sit outside of the attraction and he would call to the guests that were outside and, try to draw them into the attraction, he would sing a song called "A Parrot's Life for Me," and like do little funny gags to kind of make the guests be more enticed to come in. It was said that him and his counterpart, whose name was Juan at the Tiki Room, were taken down because they attracted too many people and created crowds at the entrance and blocked the walkways.
Fun fact on him, after they got rid of him, they actually moved him into the attraction, and he can be seen in one of the scenes. So he was removed from his original position, but he still lives on in Disney history.
Yeah.
So as far as the actual attraction, though, it received almost no changes for a long time. Disneyland's version of the Pirates, aside from refurbishments and slight costume changes to update the ride, saw no changes until 1987. And even what occurred in 1987 was just a change to the queue in the outer area to help redirect traffic around the lines that often stretch out the doors. So it wasn't even something inside the ride, which I think speaks to how well developed this was.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Have you ever noticed how big that? Total side note, but have you ever noticed how big the queue to Pirates is? Like, I feel like sometimes that ride has a 15-20 minute wait, and you walk through the queue, and you, even though there's like those little barriers up to like, or splitting the line to like walk through them, the inside of that queue is so big.
It is, and I can't imagine how long of a wait it would be if that entire queue was filled, because I've never seen it.
Oh, I've never seen it too. The longest I've ever been was the front of the building where it snakes around a couple times. I've been wrapped around that twice, but not all the way back to the entrance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's kind of one of those that I don't mind the queue, like, physically being so long, because it's fun to walk through and like see all the stuff. It really gets me like amped up for the ride. But yeah, you're right. It's massive. So the first change that actually came to the Disneyland version of Pirates and quickly made its way into the other one, or the other ones around the world, was the scene where the pirates are chasing the women through the town. This is so funny to me. And obviously, with recent news, there were, changes to kind of update this to be a little bit more family friendly in certain areas. But this first one just absolutely cracks me up. So if you're familiar with the attraction nowadays, there's the scene that involves the women that are now chasing the men around, usually with like a broom or a rake or something like that. But originally, it was the men chasing the women. So originally, that's all it was. And I guess Disney decided that families were uncomfortable with the connotations that presented. So in order to solve this, all they did was give the women trays of food, so that now it would seem like the pirates were chasing after the women because they were hungry.
Oh.
Yeah. So obviously, I guess they that wasn't good enough, and then they changed it to the women chasing the men with the broom. Along with this update in 97, which this is probably the one that I was most surprised took so long to get changed, was that the pirate that sits in front of the barrel, from what, looking at the history and what some of the other people have put, he was originally referred to as the pooped pirate, I guess because he was tired from chasing the woman around and had to sit. But you can see him sitting there, and he's originally talking about chasing this woman around town, and he's holding a dress, and the woman, who was, I guess, supposedly naked because he had her dress, you can see her poking her head out of the barrel intermittently. This was changed, and I guess they figured that adding food to everything makes it more politically correct or something, because they decided instead now he's just going to be talking about how much he loves food sitting there. And then the woman was eventually replaced with just a stray cat that stuck his head out of the barrel. And then I guess the most notable one to this was in 2006 with the big movie franchise update. Johnny Depp was added in place of the cat, and the formerly pooped pirate, who was renamed to the gluttonous pirate. Now, I don't think he has a cool name like that. He's just another guy in the town, and he's talking about the treasure map that he has to the town's treasure room.
Do you remember when the Johnny Depp figure came out and how big of a deal that was?
Oh, yeah.
Like, I remember that was in Disney's marketing everywhere. Because they had Johnny Depp out in the attraction standing next to the animatronics for videos and stuff like that. And they made you think that he was like really going to be there all the time. But yeah, that was the biggest change that we saw to the attraction, was probably when the Curse of the Black Pearl came out. And then as the other movies came out, they would add like little nods to their sequels here and there. I know we talked about this previously on a couple other episodes where they added the mermaids to the attraction. They also added mermaids that would swim in the water, but that effect kind of quickly fell apart, and they had to take them out. They added Davy Jones. I'm trying to think of other things that they added because, man, pirate names are hard. But yeah, they added a bunch of those in just for the movies. And then in 2018, we had another change that everyone listening to this show knows about, where they changed the auction scene. This was probably the most controversial out of all of the changes, because they changed the auction scene from having them auction off women, most notably the redheaded pirate from the line "We Once the Redhead," was changed to be less of a side character that the pirates were auctioning off and to more of the focal point of the attraction, as she had now been rebranded into Red the Pirate.
Yeah, so, I know a lot of the big Disney fans weren't happy when this change came. And the funny thing to me is, like, whatever side of the fence you sit on this, it's funny to look back that in 1997, Disney thought, okay, a man chasing after a woman, that has connotations, and that is not family friendly. We need to take that out of the attraction. And it's like, hey, y'all realize that there's literally a scene in this ride where they are auctioning off women to men, right? And they were cool with that for 20 years.
There's actually, like, in this documentary, there's some very interesting things in here about that stuff. Like, one of the Imagineers talks about how you can't make it 100% politically correct and this and that. And I'm thinking, like, okay, this was posted on YouTube in 2016. 2 years later, they changed the animatronic, which, just for throwing it out there, like, I'm neither here nor there about it. I don't care. And then another thing that I actually had to rewind, because I thought I misheard this. If you remember how the auction scene was, the one that they are actually auctioning off is a larger woman, and they're talking about it and this and that. And Walt Disney has a scale model of or not a scale model, but like a tiny version of this attraction, in the Wonderful World of Disney special, when he was talking about like the actual attraction when they had planned it out and everything. And he's like, oh, here's a couple pirates that are auctioning off some of the people that they've captured in the village. And like, he's so nonchalant about it. And he goes, oh, and here's the biggest prize. And he stops right on the figure of the larger woman. And I was like, wait, what?
And it was a different time.
Yeah, I had to rewind it twice. I was like, that didn't just happen, did it?
Oh, man. Times they are a-changing.
So the final thing we have in here is some fun facts about some stuff that maybe we didn't touch. I know we touched the first one.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably it.
Yeah, so one of the cool ones that I found was that during refurbishments, they have to drain all the water out of Pirates to do a lot of the work on the track system. And it takes 3 days to drain the water and refill it.
That is not surprising, but very absurd. So all of the ones that I have came from that documentary I watched because there was some really cool stuff. Which you mentioned that first one about the fire. But
You know what? I did not realize though until I just read this in the show notes that the Yale Gracie was the one that developed those.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny to think about. Like he did Pepper's Ghost, and he did the fire in Pirates of the Caribbean. Like those two effects were both so ahead of their time that it's kind of not surprising that he's the same person tied to both of them. But like, man, that's crazy. He had to really be thinking outside of the box for that.
It is, and even to this day, we were at Magic Kingdom last weekend, rode Haunted Mansion, and the people behind me getting off, I swear they were. She said, "How did they do that projection and where the ghosts were dancing?" And I was like to this day, it's still stumping people, like, because they were that good practical effects.
Yeah, that's crazy. But on a different note, speaking of some similarities between Haunted Mansion, Thurles Ravencroft, who we talked about in that episode, Paul Frees, who voiced a couple animated characters for Disney, most notably Ludwig von Drake and Exitensio, do a lot of the voices on this attraction. And I want to say that the large majority of the auction scene was actually voiced by the three of them.
Cool.
But yeah, and then this last one is a really cool story, and even though I'm going to kind of try to tell some of it, I definitely suggest watching the documentary for this alone, because the way the story is told is very touching. But Rod Miller tells this story about this cave it's part of Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico. Apparently Walt would visit them often, and the caves were actually a large inspiration for that first section of Pirates of the Caribbean where the drop is in Disneyland. And one night during one of his visits, Walt and his tour guide are leaving, and he had apparently been friends with this tour guide for a while, and he had asked her, can I stay overnight in these caves? I don't think I want to leave. And her response was, well, how can I say no to Walt Disney? So she let him stay. She walked him to a section called the King's Palace. And if you look up pictures of King's Palace in Carlsbad Caverns, you'll see exactly where the inspiration for this came from, because it's like pulled right out of these caves and stuck in the attraction. But she let him stay overnight, and she came back in the morning at like 6 a.m. and like ran around the caves to try to find him, and he was in the same spot she left him. And he was he was laying on the caverns looking up at the top of the ceiling, and she looks at him and she goes, "How'd you sleep?" And he says, "Well, I didn't. I was down here all night, and how could I sleep in a place like this?" And she's like, "Well, having been here all night, how do you feel about our caverns?" And he said, when you spend a night in a place like this by yourself, you realize that the hand of God is what built this. I have this place in California called Disneyland, and I only hope that one day people will feel a fraction of what they feel when they come to visit it."
Wow.
And I think that's so, like, it almost makes you realize, like, that's a very humbling thing. Like, he didn't set out to build something big in his mind. Like, yeah, Disney World and Disneyland are so large scale and, like, grand that a lot of us do really feel that way when we go there. But that's, he was just setting out to make a theme park that everyone could enjoy.
And, maybe it's fandom or feeling nostalgic of the way I do about the parks, but I legitimately believe that he was the kind of person that just wanted to like bring this sense of wonder to people, and like him experiencing something like that and then like immediately wanting to put that into something so that his guests could experience it too is just really cool.
Yeah, it's crazy that, I don't know, it makes you like, it's almost humbling in a way for his character that you just hear something like that. And like I said, go back and listen to that documentary. It's about 20 minutes in. There's actually the first comment on there has a link directly to the timestamp for that story. But that was probably my favorite part of that documentary.
Awesome. I'm definitely going to check that out now.
Yeah. So that brings us to the end of our discussion on Haunted Mansion. And I was right. This probably was better as it... Or, sorry, yeah. It brings us to the end of our discussion on Pirates. But I was right. This probably was better suited as a two-person episode because we're like an hour and 15 minutes in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so do you have anything you want to say before we wrap this up?
No, I mean, other than just like the Haunted Mansion episode, like, I feel like I know a good bit about these attractions, and then I go and start doing the research, and it's like, I didn't know this, I didn't know this. It's so cool, like, digging into this and seeing, and, you know, just like that story that you just told, like, you get these cool little side things that happen that, like, even if you're a huge Disney fan and you go to the parks all the time, like, you never know stuff about that.
Yeah, that was like the coolest thing. I mean, just like listening to people that worked on the attraction talk about it, or, you know, watching ride-throughs of other parks and stuff. I love finding these little pieces out, and you would never think, just to the common person, that like a Disney World attraction or a Disneyland attraction would have so much history behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's crazy that, you know, even us, like the people that go to the parks fairly frequently, there's still always something to find out about them.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
Then that's going to do it for us this week. Thanks for joining us again on another episode of the Station 71 podcast. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from. If you want to get in touch with us, links to all of our social media can be found on our website at www.station71podcast.com. If you want to send us an email, you can email us at station71podcast@gmail.com, or you can give us a call on our Google Voice line, which should be linked in the show notes. We hope you enjoyed your ride, and we'll see you real soon.
Please stand clear of the doors. Por favor, manténganse alejado de las puertas.